Commander Vextorian's antennae twitched nervously as he observed the lone human in the briefing chamber. Lieutenant Sarah Chen sat motionless among the 23 alien officers, her stillness a jarring contrast to the animated gestures of the Flaxians and the melodic humming of the Quarians. Coalition battle briefings were traditionally interactive, species interjecting, questioning, even challenging, a chaotic symphony that somehow produced tactical harmony. But the human hadn't spoken a single word. The holographic battle map cast eerie blue light across Chen's face, highlighting cheekbones that remained perfectly still while around her. Mandibles clicked, tentacles waved, and translucent skin pulsed with colors of excitement and concern. The upcoming mission against the Vrek hive mind was critical, a desperate attempt to gather intelligence on an enemy that had pushed coalition forces back across 3 sectors in as many months. The insertion point will be here, Vextorian continued, using his primary claw to indicate a small moon orbiting a gas giant. Atmospheric composition provides natural interference with Vrek sensory apparatus. Strike Team Alpha will deploy via stealth shuttle at 300 Coalition Standard Time. A Flaxian officer raised 3 of his eye stalks. Probability of detection still calculates at 32.7%. Unacceptably high by Coalition standards. The risk assessment has been approved by Central Command, Vextorian replied, though privately he shared the concern. Throughout the exchange, Lieutenant Chen's eyes remained fixed on the tactical display, particularly on the Vrek patrol routes that everyone else had already dismissed as secondary information. Her right hand rested near her datapad, fingers occasionally twitching as if making calculations without needing to input them. Lieutenant Chen, do you understand your squad's insertion point? Vextorian asked, mandibles clicking with irritation. This was her first mission with his strike team, a transfer that had come with commendations, but no explanation. She simply nodded, eyes never leaving the holographic battle projection, fingers lightly drumming against her thigh. The only movement betraying she was alive at all. The briefing continued for another 42 minutes. Species asked questions according to their natures. The Aldebarani worried about extraction protocols. The Quarians debated communication frequencies. The Flaxians requested redundancies in every system. Standard concerns, standard responses. The coalition military machine operating as designed. Yet the human silence grew heavier by the minute, becoming a presence of its own in the room. Several officers began glancing her way, their discomfort evident in species-specific tells. Membranes flickering, scales rippling, pheromones shifting. As the briefing concluded, Vextorian announced, "Final equipment check at 200. Dismissed." The chamber emptied in a rush of movement and sound, officers breaking into smaller groups to continue discussions. Chen rose smoothly, gathered her minimal notes, and headed for the exit alone. Admiral Kavoth intercepted Vextorian before he could follow, pulling him aside with one massive tentacle. The Admiral's translucent skin pulsed with concern, deep purples and reds swirling beneath the surface, colors of warning in his species. "Watch that human," Kavoth said, his voice a rumbling whisper. "I commanded alongside them during the Proxima conflict." "She comes highly recommended," Vextorian replied. "That's not what concerns me." Kavoth's eye membranes flickered rapidly. "When the chatty species goes quiet, death follows. It's in their historical records. Their most devastating military leaders were the ones who listened more than they spoke." The Admiral glanced toward the corridor where Chen had disappeared. "Humans have a saying. Still waters run deep. It means the quiet ones are hiding currents strong enough to drown you." Vextorian hadn't believed in such superstitions about humanity. Most species had their quirks, after all. Now, recalling the calculated intensity in Chen's eyes as she studied those patrol routes, he wondered if he should. "I'll observe her closely," he promised. "Do more than observe," Kavoth warned, skin darkening further. "Be ready." "For what?" Vextorian asked. for whatever she's planning that wasn't in your briefing. The officers' mess hall buzzed with the particular chaos unique to coalition gatherings, a blend of nutritional requirements and social customs that had taken decades of diplomatic negotiations to accommodate. Atmospheric bubbles separated methane breathers from oxygen dependence, thermal zones ranged from near-freezing to volcanic, and specialized sound dampeners protected species with sensitive auditory organs. Commander Vextorian navigated through the carefully organized chaos, his meal tray balanced carefully as he sought information. He found Science Officer Nax Lori at her usual table in the moderate temperature zone, her 8 eyes focused on a datapad displaying human military records. "I see our minds travel similar paths," Vextorian said, setting down his tray of nutrient paste. Nax Lori's eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture of acknowledgement in her species. As a Techuran anthropologist before joining the coalition forces, she had studied humanity longer than most. "Lieutenant Chen has an interesting service record," she said, sliding the datapad aside. "Extensive combat experience despite her relatively short service time. Humans have brief lifespans, of course." Admiral Kavoth seemed concerned about her behavior in the briefing. Vextorian admitted, lowering his voice. "Is it true? About quiet humans being dangerous?" Nax Lori's epidermis rippled with iridescent patterns, her species equivalent of thoughtful consideration. "Earth's history is written in the silence before their storms. Genghis Khan was described as thoughtful and reserved before battles. Napoleon Bonaparte often stood silent at maps for hours. Their Alexander the Great rarely spoke during war councils, preferring to listen and observe." "Those are ancient references," Vextorian scoffed, mandibles clicking dismissively. "Prehistoric by their own standards." "Then consider the Terran-Arcturus conflict," Nax Lori countered, her voice dropping further as her primary eyes glanced around for eavesdroppers. "Only 15 cycles ago." The human admiral said nothing during the final strategy session. 6 hours later, 3 Arcturus dreadnoughts were destroyed using tactics that violated every principle of space combat. "I thought those reports were classified," Vextorian said, suddenly uneasy. "They are. I was there as a cultural observer." Her bioluminescent patterns darkened. "The Arcturus never recovered. Their empire collapsed within a cycle." Their conversation halted abruptly as Lieutenant Chen entered the mess hall. The ambient noise dimmed noticeably as various species paused mid-conversation, their evolutionary instincts registering something their rational minds couldn't quite process. Chen seemed not to notice, walking directly to the human nutrition station with measured steps. Vextorian observed her interactions, minimal, efficient, purpose-driven. She collected her ration calmly, selecting protein cubes and hydration fluids with barely a glance at the options. No social exchanges, no species-specific greetings that most coalition officers learned as basic courtesy. "What do you see?" Nax Lori asked quietly. "A soldier focused on the upcoming mission," Vextorian replied automatically. "Look closer. Notice how she scans the room, not making eye contact, but cataloging positions. She's memorizing the layout, tracking exits. Her posture suggests readiness despite appearing relaxed." Chen selected a seat at an empty table with clear sightlines to both main entrances, though surrounded by dozens of chattering, clicking, humming alien officers. She might as well have been alone. "What is she planning?" Vextorian whispered, suddenly aware that his instinctive unease had been correct all along. "That," Nax Lori replied gravely, her epidermis now pulsing with warning reds, "is precisely what you should be afraid of. Humans developed as pursuit predators on a planet of prey that could run faster than they could. They learned to think ahead, to predict movement patterns, to plan ambushes." Her primary eyes fixed on the seemingly unremarkable human calmly eating her meal. "There's an old Earth military saying, 'Amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics, but the most dangerous humans, they don't talk at all. They just solve problems with whatever tools are available, including the rules and assumptions of their enemies.'" Vextorian felt a chill traverse his exoskeleton as Chen's gaze briefly met his across the room. Not challenging, not submissive, but assessing, calculating. In 6 hours, they would board a stealth shuttle together, heading toward Vrek territory. He suddenly wasn't sure which he feared more, the enemy or his own teammate. 3 cycles before joining Vextorian's strike team, Lieutenant Sarah Chen had been just another tactical officer aboard the GCS Intrepid, a mid-size coalition patrol vessel assigned to the Orion Spur. Her performance evaluations noted efficient execution of protocols and strong analytical capabilities, but nothing suggesting exceptional talent or concerning tendencies. Just one more human integrated into the vast, diverse coalition military, until the Vrek ambush changed everything. In his quarters, Vextorian reviewed the classified security footage from that day again, searching for answers. The recording began normally enough. A standard bridge configuration with 7 different species at their stations, routine communications chatter. The captain, a venerable Aldebarani named Thrix, calmly reviewing sector reports. Then chaos erupted. Alarms screamed as Vrek ships materialized from fold space without warning, an impossibility according to coalition sensor technology. The bridge erupted into panic, officers shouting contradictory suggestions, warning systems blaring in multiple frequencies, the captain frozen in momentary indecision as 3 Vrek warships locked targeting systems onto the Intrepid. Chen had been at the auxiliary tactical station, a position typically reserved for monitoring, not command. The footage showed her initial reaction, a widening of eyes, an intake of breath, the human stress response engaging. Then something changed. At precisely 4:26:33 ship time, Chen went completely still. While around her the bridge dissolved into increasingly desperate chaos, she seemed to retreat inward, her expression shifting subtly as battle alerts screamed around her. Vextorian paused the footage, studying that moment of transformation, what his species would call the molting point, when the old shell cracked to reveal something new beneath. He continued playback. At 4:27:20, Chen spoke, her voice slicing through the cacophony with unnatural calm. Recommend immediate power diversion to rear shields, full rotation on axis with simultaneous missile deployment, not for targeting but electromagnetic disruption. The captain, desperate for any solution, complied. What followed defied all coalition combat doctrine. Chen directed the helmsman to execute a maneuver that deliberately exposed their vulnerable flank, but at precisely the moment when Vrek targeting systems would recalibrate. The missiles, detonated before hitting their targets, created an electromagnetic pulse that temporarily disrupted the neural link systems that coordinated Vrek ship movements. In the 42 seconds of confusion that followed, the Intrepid escaped, severely damaged but intact. The official report praised quick thinking and adaptive response, while glossing over the 16 coalition combat protocols violated in those crucial moments. What it failed to note, what Vextorian now observed with growing unease, was that Chen had gone completely still for precisely 47 seconds before speaking. The same stillness she'd shown in his briefing. Vextorian closed the footage and opened Chen's unredacted service file, security clearance finally giving him access to what happened after the Intrepid incident. Following the ambush, Chen had been quietly transferred to Special Tactical Assessment, underwent 3 weeks of classified debriefing, then received accelerated promotion before being assigned to his strike team, all bearing the authorization code of Admiral Kevoth himself. His communication unit chimed, interrupting his investigation. A priority message flashed across the screen. Mission timeline accelerated. Deployment in 6 hours. Instinctively, Vextorian glanced back at the frozen image of Chen's face during those silent seconds before she had transformed from ordinary officer to something else. Something had awakened behind her eyes. Something cold and calculating that sent instinctive shivers down his chitinous spine. Whatever had emerged from Chen's silence on the Intrepid would be joining him on a stealth mission in 6 hours, and despite his years of combat experience, Vextorian found himself hoping that this time the human would speak up during the final mission briefing. Silence, he was beginning to understand, was humanity's battle cry. The stealth shuttle sliced through the gas giant's upper atmosphere, its adaptive hull absorbing ambient radiation to remain invisible to Vrek scanners. Inside, Strike Team Alpha performed final equipment checks with the precision that defined Coalition operations, each species following protocols developed over centuries of interstellar warfare. All except Chen. While the others methodically verified communication relays and weapons systems, she sat motionless at the viewport, studying the approaching moon with unsettling intensity. The target was a desolate rock, pockmarked with impact craters and shrouded in thin methane haze, unremarkable except for the Vrek forward base hidden beneath its surface. "Approach vector locked," announced the Quarian pilot, voice melodic despite the tension. "Atmospheric entry in 3 minutes." Vextorian moved to Chen's side, mandibles twitching with nervous energy. "Lieutenant, verify your team's insertion equipment." She nodded without speaking, eyes never leaving the viewport. "That wasn't a suggestion," he clicked, authority edging his translator's output. Chen finally turned, her gaze unnervingly direct. "Already verified. Twice. Also modified the oxygen mixture in our breathers to counteract the methane interference with human respiratory systems, and oversight in the mission parameters." Before Vextorian could respond, warning signals erupted across the shuttle's control panel. The Quarian pilot's melodic voice shifted to dissonant alarm tones. "Targeting lock. Multiple signatures. Impossible." The ambush came without warning. Energy beams sliced through the shuttle's port side, systems failing in cascading sequence as the craft lurched violently. Coalition emergency protocols activated instantly, stabilizers deploying, atmosphere containment shields engaging, distress beacon activating. "Beacon compromised," shouted a Flaxian officer, eye stalks swiveling frantically. Signal redirecting to an empty sector. The second hit sheared off the shuttle's rear stabilizers. Warning klaxons blared as the pilot fought for control against the moon's gravity well. "Brace for emergency landing," he shouted, voice breaking into discordant notes of panic. Impact was brutal. The shuttle caromed across the rocky surface, structure groaning as reinforced hull plates buckled under forces they were never designed to withstand. Interior lights flickered, then died, emergency lumens casting the cabin in haunting crimson glow. When the craft finally shuddered to a stop, half the team was injured. 3 dead. The survivors scrambled to assess their situation through pain and disorientation. "Coalition playbook states immediate defensive perimeter," gasped a wounded Aldebarani engineer named Trill, blue blood seeping through his pressure bandage. "Await extraction." Vextorian pulled himself upright, right secondary limb hanging uselessly at his side. Through shattered viewports, he could see distant lights moving across the moon's surface. Vrek ground forces converging on their position. "Extraction protocol engaged," he confirmed, mandibles clicking in determined rhythm. "Maintain position." "Defensive." A sharp sound interrupted him. Metal striking metal. Chen had broken open a sealed compartment not listed in the shuttle schematics and was removing equipment no standard Coalition soldier carried. Homemade explosive compounds, frequency disruptors, biological markers, weapons modifications that violated at least 12 Coalition safety protocols. "What are you doing?" Vextorian demanded. "They'll find us within 20 minutes, Trill whimpered, pressing harder against his wound. Chen had said nothing since the crash, methodically checking her weapons, studying the terrain through the shattered viewport. Now she looked up, and the coldness in her eyes made Vextorian flinch. "This was deliberate," she finally said, voice unnervingly calm. "The mission parameters were compromised from the beginning. Command sent us to be sacrificed." "That's treasonous talk," Vextorian hissed, though the tactical part of his mind had already calculated the improbability of their detection through stealth technology. Chen ignored him, continuing to prepare her unorthodox equipment with practiced precision. She distributed small devices among the surviving team members without explanation. "What are you doing?" Trill asked, fascinated despite his pain. "Changing the game," she replied, hands working with practiced precision. Humans have a saying, when the battle plan meets the enemy, the plan dies first. As Vrek searchlights swept closer across the barren landscape, Vextorian watched in horrified amazement as Chen began turning their certain death into something else entirely, a hunt with the Vrek as unwitting prey. "Standard coalition training assumes overwhelming force wins battles," Chen explained as she distributed her makeshift equipment among the survivors. Her voice remained unsettlingly calm, a stark contrast to the panicked breathing and pain sounds of the wounded around her. Vrek's strategy relies on this assumption. Vextorian watched her work with growing fascination that almost overshadowed his dread. Where other species froze or panicked in crisis, the humans seemed to have transformed, as if disaster had awakened something primal and calculating within her. "Your plan?" he asked, attempting to assert some vestige of command. Chen didn't look up from the small device she was calibrating. "We make them regret finding us." The Vrek hunting party's approach was methodical, 6 soldiers in tight formation, moving with the synchronized grace of a hive mind, sharing sensory information in real time. Through night vision optics, Vextorian observed their segmented bodies scanning the crash site from 50 meters out, communication tendrils pulsing with bioluminescent signals. "They're performing standard containment protocol," he whispered to Chen as they crouched behind a rocky outcropping. "They'll call for extraction units once they confirm survivors." She nodded silently, eyes narrowed in concentration as she made final adjustments to a small device no larger than her palm. The wounded Aldebarani engineer Trill huddled beside them. His blue blood now clotted, but his breathing labored. "Just follow my signal," Chen whispered, then slipped away into the darkness with a grace that seemed impossible for a species with such limited evolutionary advantages. Vextorian had studied human combat techniques, their reliance on projectile weapons, their pack tactics, their concerning willingness to accept casualties to achieve objectives. Nothing in his training had prepared him for the systematic dismantling of a superior force that he was about to witness. The first explosion came exactly when she predicted, not near the Vrek soldiers, but 200 meters behind them. Small but precisely calibrated, it triggered exactly the response Chen had anticipated. The Vrek unit splitting, 3 soldiers maintaining position, while 3 moved to investigate. "Now," Chen's voice crackled through a modified communicator that somehow bypassed Vrek jamming frequencies. "Activate the resonator." Trill pressed the button on the device she'd given him. Nothing seemed to happen. No sound, no light, no detectable energy signature. But the effect on the approaching Vrek soldiers was immediate and devastating. They convulsed violently, communication tendrils spasming, coordination shattered as their neural network collapsed into cacophony. "How did you know that would work?" Vextorian demanded as they moved under cover of confusion. "I studied Vrek autopsy reports that were classified as irrelevant," Chen replied, already setting her next trap. "Their neural pathways show vulnerability to cascading sensory overload." By the time false dawn broke over the barren moon, 7 Vrek soldiers had been neutralized, not through superior firepower, but through systematic exploitation of biological weaknesses no coalition tactical manual had ever identified. "The other survivors?" Trill asked as Chen led them toward a ridge overlooking the small Vrek outpost. "Rendezvousing at the secondary location," she replied. "If they followed my instructions exactly." Vextorian noticed she didn't specify their chances if they hadn't. He was beginning to understand that Chen operated in absolutes, success or failure, survival or death, with little conceptual space between. Below them, a Vrek patrol vessel sat on a makeshift landing pad, lightly guarded after the search parties had deployed. "We're stealing their ship," Trill asked incredulously. No, Chen said, the ghost of a smile crossing her face for the first time. We're turning it into a Trojan horse. Vextorian's translator glitched on the unfamiliar reference, but the predatory gleam in the human's eyes conveyed enough. As Chen silently wired explosives into the ship's propulsion system, he finally understood what humans meant by the calm before the storm. The quiet ones weren't following orders. They were rewriting them. The debriefing chamber on Coalition Station Alpha was filled beyond capacity. 3 tiers of seating accommodated the diversity of the Coalition's upper echelons, environmentally controlled zones for methane brothers, hovering platforms for low-gravity species, reinforced sections for the massive Joxo representatives. The air thrummed with tension, underlaid by the soft whine of translator arrays struggling to keep pace, with 17 different species simultaneously whispering their suspicions. At the center of it all stood Lieutenant Sarah Chen, still grimy from combat, standing at relaxed attention before the assembled command council. 3 days had passed since the impossible rescue. A handful of survivors from what was supposed to be a doomed mission had not only returned, but had brought with them a trove of intelligence on Vrek communication systems and tactical deployments, data more valuable than any coalition operation had obtained in the 5-year conflict. General Joe Carrion leaned forward, his massive exoskeletal frame trembling with barely contained rage. The report before us defies explanation, Lieutenant. Your shuttle was detected despite stealth technology. Your emergency beacon was compromised. Yet somehow, you and 5 survivors escaped on a modified Vrek vessel, leaving behind a destroyed enemy outpost. Chen stood motionless, eyes forward, that same unsettling calm radiating from her posture. Furthermore, the general continued, you claimed the mission parameters were deliberately designed to fail, that your team was sent as a sacrificial diversion. These are extraordinary accusations. Vextorian, seated at the witness stand with his injured limb freshly regenerated, watched Chen carefully. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, when she would finally explain her actions, her preparations, her seeming foreknowledge of their mission's compromise. You had no authority to alter the mission parameters, Joe Carrion boomed, his massive frame trembling with fury. With respect, General, Chen replied evenly. The mission parameters were designed to fail. Our team was sent as bait to test Vrek detection capabilities. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Vextorian watched the subtle reactions of the high command, twitches, color changes, pheromone shifts, that confirmed Chen's assessment. His sensory appendages detected the sudden spike in stress hormones across multiple species. Preposterous, Admiral Delani declared, but her secondary tentacles curled inward, a sign of deception in her species that any trained observer would recognize. Chen simply placed a data crystal on the table before her. This contains the original mission brief, including the classified addendum about acceptable casualties for intelligence gathering. The room erupted in multi-species outrage. Accusations flew between commanders while security officers moved toward Chen. The tactical implications were devastating. If command was willing to sacrifice its own forces without disclosure, the fundamental trust underpinning coalition operations was compromised. This is sedition, shouted a Flaxian commander, eye stalks fully extended in threat display. Admiral Kavoth, who had remained silent throughout, finally rose from his seat. The chamber quieted immediately. His status as a founding member of the Coalition Military Command demanded respect. The human speaks truth, he announced, skin fluctuating through patterns of formal declaration. The mission was indeed compromised by elements within our own command structure. The question is not whether Lieutenant Chen violated protocols, but why those protocols exist if they lead us to defeat. Security officers hesitated, caught between conflicting authorities. Chen caught Vextorian's gaze across the chamber. She didn't need to speak. Her eyes said everything. The system is broken. This is just the beginning. As they led her away for protective custody, whispers already spread through the station, between officers, among enlisted personnel, crossing species boundaries. A human went quiet, and the truth came out. Outside the chamber, junior officers gathered in clusters, sharing information through secured channels. The story spread like wildfire through coalition networks. How a single human had exposed corruption in high command, had survived an impossible mission, had demonstrated that coalition doctrine might be fundamentally flawed. By nightfall, Chen had become something more dangerous than a soldier. She had become a symbol. 3 weeks in a coalition detention cell should have broken Chen's spirit. The chambers were designed with psychological precision. Each species had unique breaking points, and coalition intelligence had centuries of data on how to find them. For humans, isolation, sensory deprivation, disruption of sleep cycles. Yet when Vextorian was finally permitted to visit, he found her exactly as she'd been in the briefing room that first day, quiet, observant, patiently waiting. If anything, the controlled environment seemed to have focused her further. "You look well," he said awkwardly, mandibles clicking in what his species used as a tension-relieving gesture. Chen sat across from him at the sterile white table, hands folded neatly before her. No restraints, an interesting detail that Vextorian filed away for later consideration. "They're dropping all charges," he informed her, secondary limbs twitching nervously. "The corruption you exposed goes deeper than anyone realized. Half the command structure has been suspended pending full investigation." Chen nodded as if she'd expected nothing less. "The evidence on your data crystal implicated 27 senior officers in what they're calling strategic misdirection. Apparently, certain factions believed that controlled sacrifices were necessary to gather intelligence on Vrek capabilities." Vextorian's voice carried a bitter edge. 5 strike teams before ours were sent on similar missions. None returned. Something flickered in Chen's eyes. Not surprise, but vindication. "There's more," Vextorian continued, leaning forward. "They're creating a new tactical division. Unconventional warfare. They want you to lead it." For the first time since he'd met her, genuine surprise flickered across Chen's face, quickly replaced by calculation. "And you. They've asked me to be your second in command. Apparently, I've developed perspective." The word hung between them, weighted with meaning. In coalition military doctrine, perspective was the closest translation for a concept that crossed species boundaries. The ability to see beyond established protocols, to question fundamental assumptions. A dangerous quality in a rigid hierarchy. 3 days later, Chen was released. Within a week, the mysterious new division began recruiting. Not just humans, but members of every coalition species who had questioned protocols, who had survived against impossible odds, who saw beyond established doctrine. They gathered in an unused maintenance bay, converted to a tactical center. 28 officers from 17 species, all with disciplinary marks in their files, all with combat records that defied explanation, all recommended by either Chen or Vextorian. "Red Flag Division," Chen announced, addressing them for the first time. The name had spread through coalition forces already, entering the lexicon as shorthand for warning signs too easily missed. "You're here because you understand something fundamental that our command structure has forgotten," she continued, her voice carrying easily through the space. "War isn't about protocols. It's about adaptation." She activated a holographic display showing coalition battle formations. Perfect, symmetrical, predictable. Then, with a gesture, she overlaid Vrek counterformations that exploited each weakness. "Conventional warfare is a game where both sides know the rules," Chen explained, cycling through tactical simulations that demonstrated repeated coalition defeats. "We keep fighting as if adherence to doctrine is more important than survival." A Flaxian officer raised his eye stalks. "The coalition military system is built on 10,000 years of combined species knowledge. You propose we discard this?" "No," Chen replied, something dangerous glinting in her eyes. "I propose we stop telegraphing our moves to an enemy that's already read our playbook." She gestured again, and the display shifted to footage from their mission, showing how her improvised tactics had confounded Vrek responses calibrated for standard coalition procedures. Each species joined the coalition bringing unique strengths, Vextorian added, stepping forward. But our standardized protocols have smoothed away those edges, making this predictable. Chen nodded, surveying the gathered officers. Unconventional warfare is when you realize there were never any rules to begin with, only patterns waiting to be broken. As word of this new approach spread, coalition soldiers began watching their human counterparts with new awareness. The quiet ones weren't problematic subordinates. They were predators shifting into hunting mode. And the Vrek, for the first time, were about to become prey. The Vrek had never faced defeat in 300 cycles of expansion. Their hive mind approach to warfare made them devastatingly efficient against conventional forces. Pattern recognition and response was their evolutionary advantage, an entire species that thought and moved as one perfect organism, adapting collectively to any threat, which is precisely why they never saw Chen's strategy coming. The final battle began with an unprecedented sight. Coalition forces seemingly in disarray, communications chaotic, movements erratic, ships breaking formation, conflicting orders echoing through command channels, tactical units operating independently without central coordination. The Vrek, sensing weakness, committed their full armada to a decisive strike. They're responding exactly as predicted, reported a Techiran sensor officer, her epidermis rippling with excitement patterns. Full commitment to primary attack vector. On the command ship, Vextorian watched Chen as she stood motionless before the tactical display. Around her, officers from the Red Flag Division maintained the same disciplined silence, communicating through subtle gestures and prearranged signals. To an outside observer, the command deck might have appeared frozen in indecision, precisely the impression they wanted to convey. How can they coordinate without speaking? An Aldebarani liaison officer whispered to Vextorian, mandibles twitching with nervous energy. They're not coordinating in our sense, Vextorian explained, his own gaze fixed on the tactical display where Vrek formations moved with a predictable precision that had once seemed unbeatable. Each unit has autonomous objectives but shared purpose. Humans call it commander's intent, understanding the why behind orders, not just the what. The coalition fleet continued its seemingly chaotic retreat, drawing the Vrek deeper into the Proxima Nebula, an asteroid field dense with mineral deposits that interfered with long-range sensors. Perfect for hiding the thousands of modified probes Chen's team had planted during the preceding weeks. Admiral Kavoth, watching from the Strategic Command Center, tapped his primary tentacle anxiously. The timing must be perfect. It will be, Vextorian replied with a confidence that surprised him. She hasn't spoken in 26 minutes. The Vrek pressed their advantage, following coalition forces deeper into the nebula, their neural link navigation systems compensating for sensor interference. Their hive mind calculated victory probabilities at 98.7%, factoring every variable except the one they couldn't comprehend, that the chaos before them was orchestrated rather than genuine. Chen's finger hovered over the activation sequence, still silent, waiting for the precise mathematical moment when the largest percentage of Vrek ships would be within the field of effect. When the trap closed, it wasn't with a roar but with elegant silence. Gravitational disruptors activated in precise sequence, creating a cascade effect that turned the Vrek's tight formation against them. Their neural link navigation systems received contradictory readings as the carefully calibrated probes transmitted false sensory data directly into their communication network. Ships crashed into each other as pilots received multiple contradictory commands simultaneously. The hive mind, overwhelmed by cascading failures, fragmented into isolated clusters unable to coordinate responses. Chen finally broke her silence as the enemy armada tore itself apart. In human history, she said softly, our greatest victories often came not from overpowering our enemies, but from understanding them better than they understood themselves. Across the command deck, officers watched in stunned silence as the undefeated Vrek fleet dissolved into chaos, their perfect coordination transformed into perfect vulnerability. As celebration erupted across coalition channels, a new protocol was officially entered into the military handbook. When facing critical battle scenarios, observe human teammates carefully. Their silence is not submission but transformation. It is the red flag that signals the fundamental rule of warfare: adapt or perish. The Vrek would eventually surrender, never comprehending how they had been defeated not by superior firepower, but by the quiet calculations of a species that had spent its entire history learning to think differently when survival demanded it. And throughout the coalition, commanders learned to watch their human officers during briefings with new respect and perhaps a touch of fear. For when the questions stopped and the silence fell, the battle had already begun in the most dangerous place of all, the human mind at war.